AEW All In London saw Bryan Danielson crowned as our new world champion. And WWE following up with Bash in Berlin, full preview and predictions coming up. It's time to roll around the ring. AEW All In London at Wembley Stadium. They're bringing it to Texas next year. Shout out to AEW. International pay-per-views becoming a thing come 2025. They announced Forbidden Door. I don't think Wembley Stadium, but will be at London next year. After that, you have All In Texas. All In's back at Wembley Stadium in 2026. Grand Slam's now a pay-per-view. Come February, they're going to be in Australia. It's good for the business. It's good for the industry. You love to see it. Shout out to AEW for that. But when it comes to Wembley Stadium this year, Bryan Danielson, the main event, with his family in the crowd, front row, Brie Bella, as we know her, his wife, 2 kids. The second you saw that, right, you had to think, okay, it could go either way, right? It could just be a tearjerker, his last match, want the family there. But then once you saw Swerve decide to go full heel for this match and antagonize Danielson, antagonize his family, and even his kids, it's like, okay, we're not going to have him do all that and then have the family be let down. So in terms of that type of booking, they did the right thing. Danielson has been called the greatest of all time when it comes to a technical wrestler, and he showed just that. This was an awesome match. And for him to win the world title, there is a lot of speculation in my brain and how this is going to look. We've seen part-time champions before. Never been a fan of part-time champions. That aside, it's also just the awkward route that AEW told this story. You had Danielson over a year ago tell us he's done being full-time. He needs to be home with his family. And then you have Danielson 3-4 weeks ago say, I'm not signing another contract. I'm done after All In. That's when you decide to make this a stipulation that he's done or not, and then he wins, right? So part-time, this dude gave us speech after speech how he needs to be home with his family. If he can't let his kids down, he can't let his family down, storyline or just realistically speaking, why is he showing up at the shows then? But he's our world champion. He should be showing up at the shows. So it's very awkward. Danielson deserves this. There's no doubt about it. The match was awesome. Swerve did his part to put Danielson over. It's not hard to put someone like Bryan Danielson over. But Swerve did his part to put this moment over, to put the match over. It was the top match of the night, not just because of the moment and not just because it was the main event. The part-time champion thing is going to have to get figured out with Danielson. How much are we expected to see him? Right? Because All In is passed. He supposedly has not signed another contract. So are we expected to see him every week? Are we expected to see him at every pay-per-view? When you're a world champion, you automatically assume it would be. Is that the case now with Danielson? That's something that's a big question mark. It doesn't ruin the moment. It doesn't ruin Danielson deserving this honor and what the match was. But it does put a big question mark on how this title reign will look like. And also, what should we expect as fans? Should we expect someone that did what Brock Lesnar or Roman Reigns did, and that I'm only showing up for the big shows? Should we expect more than that? Should we expect less than that? We have no idea what to expect, and that's where the question mark comes in with this decision to put the title on Danielson. In terms of Swerve Strickland, again, he did his part, and he has, become a bigger star, being a world champion, re-signing with AEW. But man, as much as I love the moment for Bryan Danielson, you can't do this to Swerve. His entire title reign has been about putting someone else over. Even though he was winning, beating Will Ospreay, and Ospreay goes on to the feud with MJF, right? And not even just putting other people over in terms of making them more important. His entire title reign, it never felt like the most important thing on the show. Double or Nothing, Christian Cage, the main event involved the Elite. Even when Swerve Strickland himself was in blood and guts, the biggest part of that match was what's going on with the Elite, and then Darby Allin getting his TNT title shot against Jack Perry. Like, Swerve was just a supporting act in that match. Swerve was a supporting act in a lot of the pay-per-views as champion. Swerve, even when he defended against Will Ospreay, yes, he beat Will Ospreay, and yet somehow Ospreay deserves it. Somehow Ospreay seemed a lot more important than Swerve following that match in terms of his feud with MJF. MJF returns and goes right after Will Ospreay. He doesn't go right after Swerve. And the MJF Ospreay thing for weeks and weeks and weeks felt like the most important storyline in AEW heading into All In. So giving Swerve this moment to beat Danielson in terms of what it does for Swerve's character was probably the route to go. Danielson could have put on a great match, as we know he can, lost here, and just had this be his retirement match, and no one would have been mad about that. Nobody would have looked side-eyed at AEW or thought less of Danielson. And it would have just made Swerve look that much more important because Swerve needed that as a world champion. What it seems as if they are doing is now Swerve going back to Adam Page. Adam Page did not win the Casino Gauntlet match, gets involved in the main event, and we're going right back to that match, going back to that feud. It feels like we've had that payoff. The matches were great with Swerve and Adam Page, but it feels like that payoff has already happened. That bloody match that they had, like you feel like we've told that story. And if we were going to tell this story again, add the tweak of putting the world title in the picture. Swerve keeping that world title, that added to why Adam Page was so frustrated and obsessed with Swerve. It was about the title as well. It would have made more sense to have Adam Page win the Casino Gauntlet match and then Swerve defend against Adam Page. Instead, we're rehashing the same feud with no extra stakes. It's the same thing we saw 6 months ago. Two non-champions going at it because they hate each other. We've seen it. We've had that blow-off. If you wanted to go back to it, the world title needed to stay in this feud. Speaking of the Casino Gauntlet match, Christian Cage... We'll get to the trios titles in a moment. Christian Cage winning the Casino Gauntlet match. He'll get a title shot against, apparently, Bryan Danielson. I don't hate that match. We saw it for the TNT title. I love the story behind it. You have two guys who were forced to retire at one point. We thought we'd never see them wrestle again. We thought we'd never see them wrestle the same again, and they're both at the top of their game right now. They both have done great work in AEW. Love, love, love that match. But when it comes to, yes, what I just said about the world title, but Christian Cage, we're rehashing the same segment with Killswitch, Luchasaurus, whatever. We had the same segment with those two, where Killswitch looks as if he's going to turn on Christian Cage, and then last second helps Christian win the match. We've done that exact segment so many times with so many different people. I mean, we were doing it in December with Adam Copeland. You are talking 9 months ago. I compared this story to the Otis Chad Gable story in WWE, which I thought that went a little too long before they broke up. And the Christian Killswitch thing started before that story. This is something that we've seen no progression in. We just continue to do the same thing over and over. It hasn't hurt Christian's character. Christian Cage has done great work. We know that as a heel. He'll do great work in a story with Bryan Danielson whenever that match happens. But this whole thing with Killswitch and Christian, I don't know that we care about it that much. Like, we saw the Luchasaurus name come up in the match. Great. I don't know that we care about it to tell this story for a year plus, and who knows how much longer before we finally get what we see coming, and that is that Killswitch and Christian go their separate ways, have a match, whatever it may be. This has been going on way too long, and it's not even just the time. It's the fact that we've seen the exact segment that we saw in Wembley Stadium over and over again. It got old a while ago. One more thing from the Casino Gauntlet match, Ricochet debuting in AEW. Look, I'm not surprised, right? You can say what you will. A lot of people had their comments about where he'll be on the card come 6 months from now. I get it, and I don't necessarily disagree. I'm not going to argue that point one bit, but, you know, when it comes to Ricochet, like, yeah, it's a big moment. And I think Ricochet's decision to go to AEW directly involved Will Ospreay. He is instantly going right at Kyle Fletcher for Dynamite, and that is, of course, Will Ospreay's best friend. That should automatically, especially with Ospreay being a champion again, lead to Ricochet and Ospreay at some point in the near future. I think that booking in Ricochet's brain is what led to that decision. I don't hate it. That match is going to deliver. What happens afterwards, what happens long-term with Ricochet, we'll see. If you look at the options for Ricochet immediately following WWE, he's too big of a name to go do anything too small, indies, overseas, international, right? TNA, if you're somebody that just got released by WWE like he did, right, or his contract was up, TNA is working way too closely with WWE. That move feels very lateral, right? Could he have been a bigger name in TNA? Sure. Yeah, most likely. Probably would have been a lot more important, but TNA and WWE, that relationship has become weekly. It's mostly NXT, but it's weekly, right? Joe Hendry is literally challenging for the NXT title, right? And he's still in TNA, and like we see the crossovers consistently, so it feels too much like one company for somebody who just left WWE to go to TNA. So in that sense, I'm not surprised that Ricochet is in AEW. I'm not going to argue that long-term this may not sit well with him when it comes to wanting to be at the top of the card, wanting to be on TV consistently. I think he will for a good 6 months. Post 6 months from now, I know it's a multi-year deal, but post 6 months is where it's going to get interesting in terms of where Ricochet is on the AEW card. I mentioned the trios titles. That went to, yes, Claudio Castagnoli, Pac, who by the way has a title shot at All Out for a whole different title, and Wheeler Yuta. You spent weeks and weeks, months at this point, telling a great story with the Bang Bang Gang, with the Patriarchy, with Christian, with the House of Black. And then the last show, literally the day before, you tape 3 wrestlers together who have never been a trio before. You enter them into the match, which was bad enough. They didn't even need to be there. This match could have been a triple threat, ladder match or not. The story has been awesome with the 3 trios that have been involved. It's been what's been keeping Collision watchable at this point. And for them to put together a random trio to win this match and take the titles away from the 3 that were telling this story, and I know they moved on with Christian in the world title, so if you wanted Christian in the world title picture, House of Black, Bang Bang Gang, either one would have been the right decision in this match. And for them to randomly tape together 3 wrestlers that had nothing to do with this story, one of which is going to go focus on a whole nother title for the next pay-per-view. This is the most random pay-per-view booking we've seen from AEW in a very long time. Great show. This opened the show. The match was way too much going on with ladders and 12 people, but the result just kind of kicked it off of, this is some random booking that did not deserve this story. Not one bit. On the women's side of things, Mariah May taking the women's title from Toni Storm. We compared the 2 women's feuds for All In London, and this match did exactly what we thought it would do, and that is outperform the other women's match, the TBS title match. Mariah May 100% deserved this moment, and no, not because they were in London, but because of how great she has done since the heel turn, literal heel turn against Toni Storm. Toni Storm can benefit from a loss like this. Her character, half of her character is losing her mind, going crazy. So losses help a character like this. She had a great run with the title as well. This women's title picture has been so well done since Toni won this title, and it's going to continue to be that way with Mariah May as champion. The storytelling within this match, the match itself, there was a lot of blood within the first 4 or 5 matches of All In London, and this was probably the only one that needed blood early on, at least, just because of how serious this feud has been going on. These 2 put on a show. They did exactly what we thought they'd do going into the show, and this kicked off a great title run for Mariah May, which could very well include someone that returned on 0 Hour, and that's Jamie Hayter. I'm going to jump to this. I know we got a TBS title match to talk about, but this is a bigger deal than AEW wants us to make us believe that it is. Jamie Hayter was so over before she had to go away. The pop that she got was amazing. She should instantly be in one of the title pictures in the women's division. And for them to waste this moment on 0 Hour, and AEW All In, when it comes to the actual pay-per-view, the pace was great. 4 hours, you expect that. This is like their WrestleMania. You're not going to get mad at them for going 4 hours here. And they went almost exactly 4 hours, and that's fine. You had a Jericho hook match that could have easily been on 0 Hour. And this exact segment with Jamie Hayter coming out and returning when she did should have, could have been on that main card. Saraya wanted a spot on Wembley on All In. She deserves it too. This would have been a perfect moment for the main card. I didn't need her right in the TBS title picture or the women's title picture. But this is a much bigger deal than AEW wants us for some reason to believe it is. Jamie Hayter should instantly be involved in one of the two title pictures. I think she's an awesome first feud for Mariah May because of how over Jamie Hayter is. If you want to add more heat on Mariah May's heel character, Jamie Hayter is the one that can do that. Let's talk about the TBS title match. Mercedes Moné is retaining that title against Britt Baker. The match, subpar, and a lot of people expected that. But I will say it wasn't Mercedes' fault. Mercedes herself, and not that she, Britt has some work to do to get to the level that they are booking her at, and it was shown there. Mercedes carried this match. Britt struggled, yes, but that made Mercedes look real good in this match. And I think that's a good thing. Mercedes is our champion, whether you like it or not, believe it or not. They are pushing her as a big face and a big name in the women's division. So Britt struggling through this match, and for us as fans watching at home, clearly seeing Mercedes carrying this match, it makes Mercedes as a champion a lot more believable outside of her just getting the win. But watching her here, there were spots that she had to save that she did. Her selling, that is what keeps Mercedes in a match, in ring, at the top where she is, and that is her selling. Offensively, she has some work to do, but when it comes to taking moves and making moves look legit, she does that almost better than anyone in the AEW women's division right now. Britt struggled, which made this result make a lot of sense, but in a weird way, Britt's struggles helped us look at Mercedes as the champion that she is and say, okay, yeah, this was the route to go. I mentioned earlier, Will Ospreay getting the title back from MJF. Look, this was talked about leading into the show, and I called it a lose-lose, and not because it's a bad match. It was just the booking leading into this match, wasting the classic that they had on Dynamite about a month ago. It could have been saved for Wembley Stadium, and in terms of booking, MJF drops the title that he just won, or you would have had Will Ospreay dropping 2 straight matches to MJF on a big card. No, you didn't want to do either one. Daniel Garcia getting involved, yeah, that's where MJF goes, right? But when it comes to the title picture, it makes sense that the next route would be Daniel Garcia somehow getting that title shot, because that was the whole point behind Daniel Garcia. Daniel Garcia wanted his shot, wanted his moment, wanted the shot at the title. His focus is now going to be on MJF, and in that sense, remember Daniel Garcia's disruption, that's not what ended this match, right? MJF was able to recover after that, and in that sense, as much as Will Ospreay losing on this stage a second time to MJF, it probably, big picture speaking, probably would have made more sense, because that title being involved with MJF and Daniel Garcia will continue to tell that story, because that's been Garcia's story, wanting to get into the title picture finally, wanting a big title match on a pay-per-view. But if Garcia is going to focus on MJF, who is no longer a champion, and Will Ospreay is now going to go and focus on someone completely different in Pac for the next pay-per-view, this has got to be about the title when it comes to Daniel Garcia. That's what got him into this story. That's why he's involved with these guys. That's why he was involved in this match. Shout out to the pop for Daniel Garcia in London, by the way. But MJF dropping the title here, that makes the MJF-Garcia feud doesn't really do what Garcia wanted it to do. Because if MJF is going to fall to Garcia too, and the title's not even involved, Garcia's not even getting what he wants, and Ospreay's continued to focus on something completely different. The match was awesome. The names are huge. Good for Garcia to be in a spot like this. The writing in terms of, I guess, the order of events here, it probably should have been a little different when it comes to when the match first took place between Ospreay and MJF. And what is Daniel Garcia's goal? Is it titles? What is it, right? Because I don't know that people care enough about Garcia without a title involved. He's not that name. And that's why his focus should be on the title more than MJF. And the only way you could have done that is keep the title on MJF for now. A few more things from All In London. Jack Perry retaining the TNT title in the coffin match against Darby Allin. Quick match. I mean, I don't know what I expected from this. It felt like a very basic Darby Allin match. Just some stunts, some crazy stunts that Darby does, and then just rush to the finish. I'm not sure if they were short on time or whatever it may be, but Jack Perry retains, which is cool. Like, it should be that way. He just won that title, and it continues to make him look important. Sting coming back, clearly got a little restless in retirement very quickly, and helping Darby Allin. That's fine, but Darby Allin continuing to be stuck to Sting. Sting retired in March. Love to see Sting. Great moment, fine. But Darby Allin needs to progress away from that. And to have a very short, basic match that he lost, only to get saved by Sting, who's not even a wrestler anymore, who retired and now has to come out of retirement to save his ass. I don't know that it does anything for Darby's character. There's only so much you can do with a guy that all he's known for is getting thrown around in crazy stunts. A very basic Darby match. I'm not sure I expected that here. I expected Jack Perry to retain, but the match felt like a rushed, basic Darby match. We saw the Young Bucks get involved with Darby and Jack Perry. That was after they retained against FTR and the Acclaimed. Fine. The tag team division is struggling in AEW right now, so I'm not sure a change here was necessary because FTR and the Acclaimed, neither one really feels like a better option than the Young Bucks. But I love to see the grizzled young veterans getting involved afterwards because, again, the tag team division needs something. And could they be the something? We'll see. They had a good run in NXT. We've seen them very sparingly in AEW so far. We know they can go in the ring. It's something different for the tag team division, and that's what this division needed going into All In, so I appreciate that. We'll see how serious they push them in terms of the tag title picture. They stare down the Young Bucks. They attack the other two teams. Are we going to push them to the top of the division? I say you do so. Right? Clearly, we don't do rankings anymore. So just for the fact of giving the tag team division something new, something different, a shakeup that we haven't seen and feels like a year and a half, I'm all for it. And I mentioned one match that probably should have been on 0 Hour, and that is Hook getting the FTW title against Chris Jericho. Look, the second you heard Taz's music as part of Hook's intro, you had to know Taz was going to get involved. All for that spot. Great moment. Love to see it. That Taz mission, I know he hasn't done it in a while. Looked a little weak on the outside of the ring, but I'm all for the moment. I just don't understand how you don't get at least Shibata, who we've seen back, but Samoa Joe involved in this one, right? You had Samoa Joe literally driven through a wall weeks and weeks ago, and this is the payoff, right? To help Hook get that title from Jericho, get the payback, right? Especially a name like Samoa Joe on a stage like Wembley Stadium. Was very surprised, a little let down to not see Samoa Joe involved in this one. Good to get the title back on Hook, that's fine. Hopefully that means less of a learning tree with Jericho. That bathroom line, that told you it's probably the route you should go. And moving on to WWE, they are following up this weekend with Bash in Berlin, another afternoon pay-per-view that is headlined by Cody Rhodes giving Kevin Owens a world title shot. And on SmackDown, they are pushing a potential Kevin Owens heel turn. Of course, Grayson Waller and Austin Theory kind of leading that charge. That is something that we kind of fantasy booked in our head. We can definitely see that coming. We haven't seen a heel KO, especially a KO heel turn, as we have famously seen in the past with the likes of Sami Zayn and Chris Jericho. We haven't seen that in a while. It could have made sense. And then pushing it on SmackDown officially no longer has that making sense for Bash in Berlin. I do not want to see KO turn heel after watching SmackDown. You can't make something so obvious, that obvious, right? That is something that fans, the second KO got in a feud with Cody Rhodes, that is something that fans automatically said, God, that'd be cool. And for WWE, if they were to overly push it leading into Bash in Berlin, only to give it to us, that makes Cody Rhodes' character look really bad. That makes Cody Rhodes' character look really dumb. It's not even just about it being obvious and not predictable, right? And whatever it may be. It's more about Cody Rhodes' character because, again, if you are pushing it that hard, we had a whole video package. You had Waller and Theory throwing it in Cody's face. Cody's talking to KO about it. The announcers are constantly talking about it. So everything that we're pushing with this, and if Cody Rhodes allows KO to turn heel on him during or after or before the match, it doesn't matter. That's a bad look on Cody's character. You can't push it too much. Kevin Owens will not turn heel at Bash in Berlin. Cannot turn heel at Bash in Berlin. It could have been a great moment. And in terms of the Randy Orton thing that we still want to see with Cody Rhodes, if we go that route, we want to see a heel Randy Orton. And to have basically the same story be told with Kevin Owens and Cody Rhodes, and then potentially Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes, that feels way too identical of stories. And if you want to save a heel turn against Cody Rhodes, save it for Randy Orton. And in terms of the match for Bash in Berlin, heel turn or not, I think you keep it friendly. I think you keep it a straight-up great match. Cody Rhodes keeping the title because, again, we got to get to that Randy Orton feud, which, again, that's a heel turn for a title change. Randy Orton could definitely pull that off. Let's go to Randy Orton's title match because, yes, he's now on Raw challenging Gunther for the World Heavyweight title. And when it comes to how this feud has been built thus far, this match has got to be just to make Gunther's title reign look strong. That's all it's got to be. I'm not a fan of the match. I would have went a couple different ways in terms of Bash in Berlin for the world title picture. I would have kept Randy Orton on SmackDown and continued to tease that Cody Rhodes thing. But Randy Orton, that aside, of course, is Randy Orton. And that name, the caliber name, is big enough for Gunther to have a great main event with Orton on pay-per-view and to get that win and to just have Gunther look like the strong champion. Of course, he just won it. We don't expect Orton to stay on Raw. We don't expect Gunther to drop the title that quick. And Gunther needs to look like that strong champion because a lot of Raw is focused on Damian Priest, Rhea Ripley, and Liv. And the world champion, by the way, is Gunther. We have to have Gunther look strong. This is the perfect way to do it. Gunther will retain at Bash in Berlin. Strap match, CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, great feud. We've talked about it. Potential trilogy on the way with Bad Blood and maybe a Hell in a Cell. But man, I'm watching this segment on Raw leading into Bash in Berlin, and it's the first time just this week leading into Bash in Berlin where I had the thought of this feud's kind of hit a wall. We've kind of said the same story about these two for a good 4 to 5 weeks. The feud has been about the bracelet since before SummerSlam. Drew got the win, and we jumped right back into a match, and now it's just turned into Punk attacking Drew every week, attempting to get the bracelet, failing to get the bracelet. Drew comes out the next week, talks his shit about CM Punk. He does it well, yes, but it's been a kind of a rehash of that, right? We're repeating the same segment. It's a great story. It's a main event segment. The match will be great. I just don't know that this has that much more legs post Bash in Berlin. I don't know that I would have had Bash in Berlin be a match. I think I would have had Gunther challenging one of these two for his world title, right? Just to get away from these two, right? Maybe it's Gunther and Punk, and Drew screws Punk, and that's how we get to our Hell in a Cell of Bad Blood. I'm not sure that I would have gone potentially three straight pay-per-views with these two. The feud, the story has hit a wall, especially with Seth Rollins no longer involved. And when you're rehashing that same segment 2 to 3 straight weeks since before SummerSlam, really? I don't know that I need another match post Bash in Berlin. I'm not saying we won't. I expect these two to be in Hell in a Cell of Bad Blood. But in terms of where the story is and has been, I don't know that a third match makes much sense. But since we do have a third match most likely at Bad Blood, CM Punk would most likely go over here to make it 1-1 and then that rubber match come inside Hell in a Cell. Mentioned the Judgment Day earlier, mixed tag, Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley going against Dominik Mysterio and Liv Morgan. And with Priest and Ripley, I mean, you're talking about two SummerSlam moments where they lost their titles, lost their title shots, got screwed over. This feels like the biggest lose-lose situation heading into Bash in Berlin, just because of the fact that I don't know that you want Priest and Rhea to fall for a second straight pay-per-view after getting screwed over so many times over the last couple weeks, beat down so many times, screwed over at SummerSlam, right? Because these are two of your biggest stars, Rhea specifically in the women's division. But if you want us to take this new Judgment Day seriously, if you want us to continue to take it seriously for a potential Finn Balor-Damian Priest feud, Dom and Liv have to go over here. Just because of the fact that if they create this whole new Judgment Day just for Priest and Rhea to beat them down, why do I care about this new Judgment Day post Bash in Berlin? Why does Finn Balor care about this Judgment Day post Bash in Berlin when they went out and couldn't even get the job done at the pay-per-view? So this is something where Dom and Liv most likely go over. I don't love it for Priest and Rhea, right? But I think that result keeps Priest involved in the feud, keeps Rhea involved in the feud, because as much as we expect a Priest-Balor matchup, I think we get one more Rhea Liv title match, and Rhea wants that title. Rhea stays in this feud. Priest stays in this feud. I think Finn Balor is the one that screws over Priest and Rhea this time around. Dom and Liv get the win. And lastly, speaking of tag matches, women's tag titles, Bianca Belair, Jade Cargill getting their rematch again against Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. And this has got to go back to Bianca and Jade. It's really just righting the wrong of giving the titles to Alba Fire and Isla Dawn to begin with. It was a moment at Clash at the Castle just because they were in Scotland. It was not built up. There was no reason to take the titles from Bianca and Jade. A lot of people foresee a Bianca-Jade one-on-one match in the future, and the perfect way to do that is for them to be dominant tag champions going in basically the WrestleMania season next year, because remember, WrestleMania is later in the year, so you have that much more time to tell a story, to build to a story. I think Bianca and Jade win it here, keep those titles going into WrestleMania season, drop it before Mania, and to set up a Bianca Jade one-on-one match, but they got to get the titles back first. A few more things to get through before we get out of here. The IC title picture getting determined in a number one contender tournament that will lead to a fatal four-way match. We saw Jey Uso and Pete Dunne advanced thus far to the fatal four-way that will take place in 2 weeks. 2 more triple threat matches on Raw next week. Dom Mysterio, Dragon Lee, and Ilya Dragunov in one of them. And then Sheamus, Ludwig Kaiser, and Bronson Reed, who we'll talk about. That's in the other one. Of course, one will challenge Braun Breaker. I think the interview that Braun Breaker had on Raw, that kind of foresaw what we see in the future, and that is a Jey Uso-Braun Breaker feud. I think it makes sense. Jey Uso at some point, we want him back in the Bloodline. Who else do we want back in the Bloodline? Sami Zayn. Braun Breaker took that title from Sami Zayn. Braun Breaker defeating Jey Uso in a title match. Whether or not Sami Zayn gets involved in that match, I don't expect him to. But I think that could just push Jey Uso and Sami Zayn that much closer to getting back together as a team, and then that much closer to getting back together in terms of the Bloodline for whatever that leads to when it comes to a potential War Games match and everything going on with Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa. So Jey Uso, no matter who wins the triple threats next week, Bronson Reed in one of them, that seems like an obvious choice. I just don't know that I put him in this title picture right now because I don't want him to take a loss yet. Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed, that feels like a bigger staged match. It's a perfect way to make Braun Breaker look that much stronger by taking out someone the level of intensity of Bronson Reed. I expect potentially Braun Strowman to rob Bronson Reed of this opportunity. Even if Bronson Reed advances to the Fatal 4-Way, after what we saw on Raw, I think Braun Strowman kind of cancels out Bronson Reed in that situation. I love Dom Mysterio being involved in the title picture, but it just doesn't feel like they want to push him. We saw Rey Mysterio back on Raw yet again, and Rey and Dom constantly being, I know it's father-son, but attached at the hip. These two shouldn't even be on the same show, because at this point, Rey is holding Dom back. Everything that Dom Mysterio does for the last 2 years, Rey Mysterio is involved. We've seen the match multiple times. We've seen them at WrestleMania, and then we did it again. Dom finally beat Rey, and we continue to put Rey in front of Dom. Until they stop doing that, Dom Mysterio will not evolve as great of a heel as he is, and I love it for what's going on and everything in the Judgment Day. But when you look at the Judgment Day picture, Rhea Ripley is going to get paired off with Liv. Damian Priest, despite the tag match at Bash in Berlin, is going to get paired off with Finn Balor, and that leaves Dom doing absolutely nothing besides continuously involved with his dad. Rey Mysterio needs to be on a completely separate show, and those two need to not interact for a very, very long time, if ever again. We've seen it enough. And until they stop doing that, Dom will not progress, so I don't know that he has a shot in this IC title tournament. Again, I go with Jey Uso. Jey Uso, a good title match with Braun Breaker. I don't know that he's singles title caliber. I understand how popular Jey Uso is. I just don't know, especially with the Bloodline story looming, a potential Usos reunion. You would assume they're in the tag title picture at that point. I just don't see a Jey Uso singles title run coming. But that loss to Braun Breaker, in a weird way, would push him closer to Sami Zayn and the Bloodline story. Talked about Bronson Reed, the brawl with Braun Strowman on Raw, which led to a tsunami on top of a car. Perfect way to make both men look strong. Bronson Reed continues to look absolutely dominant, and to do it to someone the caliber and the size of Braun Strowman, that just adds another layer to it. Everything in terms of the beatdowns have done it justice, right? Seth Rollins, big name. Miz and R-Truth, lesser names, and also smaller people, right? And now he does it to somebody who is on his level, at his weight class in Braun Strowman. But again, it made Braun Strowman look strong too, because Braun did not just take a beatdown. This was a straight up brawl, a back and forth fight all the way out the building into the parking lot. This makes Braun Strowman look a bit stronger than he has in a very long time, even though he got laid out. And it is about pushing Bronson Reed. It is about putting Bronson Reed over. But this brawl put Braun Strowman back in the light of being a monster that we haven't seen in about 4 to 5 years. This did a lot for Braun Strowman despite being laid out at the end. Big picture speaking, we probably have one more match coming that Bronson Reed will probably get over. But anyone watching this brawl from afar is looking at both of these guys and saying, I want nothing to do with either of them. It did a lot for both men. Also on Raw, Uncle Howdy's in-ring debut main eventing against Chad Gable. Look, the biggest question mark when it comes to Uncle Howdy and the Wyatt Six, we saw the rest of the Wyatt Six in action a couple weeks ago, and that is, how would this translate in-ring? How will it look in-ring? Will it work out? And I think this did exactly that. It answered any questions that you had about the Wyatt Six, any questions that you had about Uncle Howdy. From as specific and as small as what are they going to wear? How are they going to wrestle in masks or whatever it may be and still look creepy and still have that same mystique? It still has all of that. And yet he could still put on a great match. The match itself, you're in there with Chad Gable. It's really hard to not look good with Chad Gable. And that match made both men look great, because as much as we want to push the Wyatt Six, as much as we want to push Uncle Howdy, this needed to not be a whole type of beatdown and squash match. This is still Chad Gable. We're still trying to create American made. But Uncle Howdy, we look at that as a whole different force, and a powerful force that no one can figure out. Chad Gable and American made do not take a hit for Chad Gable's loss here. It was a great match. They proved that they can go in the ring. They proved that this can translate into the ring. And they proved that we don't need to look completely unstoppable and invincible to get a character like this over. That's where you struggle with a character like this, when they look unbeatable to the point that it's too predictable, that it's not believable. I watched that match, and there was a couple times I thought Chad Gable was going to go over. No, it wouldn't have made sense here, but that's what you want for this character. That type of unpredictability of not knowing if any of those members are going to lose here, not knowing how the match is going to look and how the match is going to go, that's going to help this Wyatt Six run and the Uncle Howdy character last for a very, very long time. And lastly, LA Knight doing a U.S. title open challenge, but it'll be on SmackDown. A lot of talks about how many matches Triple H likes to put on a card. He's been sticking to 5 for at least regular PLEs outside of maybe a SummerSlam or WrestleMania. I think 6 is a good number. I don't know that it's a big enough issue to really bring up or worry about, just because I'm all for a PLE or pay-per-view not going too long, especially for WWE, who they have one once a month, really, outside of the holidays. We see a lot more, even still, than AEW. I don't need these shows pushing 3-4 hours. And when you put more matches, you're either going to rush the matches on the card, or you're going to have a show that pushes for 3-4 hours. And that's just not something that they want to do anymore. And I'm okay with that because of the amount of PLEs that we have from WWE. In terms of the open challenge for LA Knight, it feels like Carmelo Hayes would be a good option just because they have history with LA Knight, but Carmelo Hayes has been in this what seems to be a best-of-5 series with Andrade, so I'm not sure that the focus is on there. I would go an NXT route. Make it a little bit of a surprise. Even though it's on SmackDown, it's still in Berlin, so I think a nice surprise from NXT would be awesome. I would go as crazy of predicting Joe Hendry. Realistically speaking, I probably wouldn't go that route because an LA Knight Joe Hendry match, I don't want either of those guys taking a loss. Obviously, we're not going to put the title on Joe Hendry, and I don't know that Joe Hendry coming up to take a loss on SmackDown will do him justice with how over he is. So that's just a crazy shot in the dark type of prediction. But I think when it comes to the history that LA Knight has with people on the roster right now, I would have Carmelo Hayes step away from Andrade. With how good those matches have been between those two, I would give this moment to Carmelo Hayes. If they go that route, I don't know that it's a clean finish. I feel like Andrade gets involved to help LA Knight retain the title, or we just don't have a finish altogether. But looking at the SmackDown roster, I'd go at Carmelo Hayes, unless we're bringing someone up from NXT. Roar Around the Ring is available every week. Find us on YouTube at Roar Around the Ring. I'm Justin Valentine. Talk to you guys very soon.